everyone. Welcome to the STEERus Weekly Grind. I'm Loralyn Mears, your host today. And we've got Jack Mardack in the house, calling in from the West Coast, talking to us a little bit about the kinds of things going on at Oyster, where they've developed some really cool technology to be able to make international hiring, well, to simplify it, because everybody's got this, that, tax rules, all kinds of things, finance payouts. And who wants to, I don't know, it makes my head spin. I'm one of those people. I don't like all that finance and ops stuff, but their software makes it simple. So with that, let me introduce, or let Jack introduce himself. Hey, Jack.
Hey, Loralyn. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm Jack Mardack, co-founder of Oyster, the leading global HR platform. Our mission is to make the world a more equal place by making it possible for companies everywhere to hire people anywhere. And so our software platform, as Loralyn described it, makes it easy to compliantly hire and pay and give benefits to a globally distributed workforce. And we are at oysterhr.com.
Excellent. And then, you know, folks may or may not know, Jack also has a wonderful, wonderful contribution that he makes as a volunteer and helping, really trying to make the, you know, things equitable. It's not just a slogan that they've put in as co-founders in at Oyster. It's something that they live by. And I think that's really important. And Jack, maybe you want to say a little bit more about some of those efforts and initiatives?
Yes, thank you so much for saying so, Loralyn. So we are, I dare say, a new kind of organization that is as interested in the opportunity to become a big business as we are by the opportunity to have a meaningful positive impact in the world. And so right from the very beginning, the genesis of Oyster was, it seems that because we're looking at a multi-trillion-dollar knowledge worker talent gap in the world problem, right? Not because we don't have the smart people on planet Earth to do the knowledge work that we need to do in the next decades, but because it doesn't happen to be conveniently located in those parts of the world where those companies have happen to be located. So the pandemic has obviously been a great liberator of that historical constraint, and we're very excited by that. So we saw that as a problem, and we also saw it as a problem that PhDs were pushing brooms who didn't want to be, shouldn't be, merely because in the place where they happened to have been born, there weren't opportunities commensurate to the magnitude of their talent. And so we were very excited by the opportunity to correct a fundamental unfairness in planet Earth, which is that by accident of birth, some people don't get to have amazing, fulfilling careers. And so as someone familiar with the history of HR solutions, and you understand that hiring people in other countries has been a complicated problem for a long time and remained undisrupted by software. Reasons for that is because employment, unlike a lot of the territories into which software ventures, is a regulated thing. Jurisdictions, countries, states have rules about employment that companies have to follow. And so automation of all of this complexity has remained a significant challenge. So we were very excited to create Oyster with these opportunities in mind, and with a focus on becoming a lever that ultimately can be seen to have made a difference in redressing some of the inequality that we saw before the pandemic.
Now I have to ask, because I always like digging into how people came up with their names. So does it have that whole oyster pearl thing going with it? Or where'd the name come from?
Yes. So we put in some early diligence and research into finding a great name, and this is before the pandemic, circa the middle of 2019. And even then, before the pandemic had blown all of this up, as it were, and made it all of the more relevant and necessary, it was clear that there was an opportunity to create a brand of global significance because of what we were trying to do, which is solve for the complexities of global employment and change lives for millions of people, particularly in the developing world, who we would want to make excited about the opportunity to have and to acquire life-changing remote work, right? So a big brand space. So we were very ambitious, and so fell in love with Oyster, which came up in our review of a number of different possibilities. And yes, it did have some great attributes. some pre-existing metaphorical associations. The world is your oyster, which applies both to people teams, whom you would encourage now to think globally about their talent acquisition panorama, and also to job seekers, whom you would also say, wherever you are, the world is your oyster. We're happy to provide the means for you to connect in gainful employment with an amazing company. And so Oyster checked a lot of boxes that way. That there was nothing really famous in the world, very famous, maybe the London card that was sort of already using Oyster. And so we went for it. And so far, so good, I must say.
Fantastic. I love the, the founder stories and hearing a little bit of the backstory, the things that lead up to it. So that's kind of fun. But let's switch gears a little bit and talk about employees, because you guys have, a global purview. What do you think employees, people, are really struggling with right now?
Yeah, great question. So I think relative to the effects of the pandemic, because we're still reflecting on this as a significant event that's driving what's going on right now, even 19 months hence. So relative to the effects of the pandemic, I would say one of the worst things employees are struggling with now is lingering uncertainty about the logistics of work at their company. Many organizations, believe it or not, are still operating in a kind of limbo where they have not made a definitive decision about the role of the office in their way of working in the future. And as a result, I would say millions of people have not been able to get comfortable again, nor been able to plan the configuration of their lives, i.e. what city they want to live in, their childcare arrangements. Am I going to be able to be there at 3 p.m. to pick up my daughter, et cetera? And so I think that's probably the worst thing that is going on right now at a fairly large scale.
What have you heard about initiatives and things to help people, really quell some of those fears and that uncertainty? Do you know any large, either like, macro level initiatives or things that are local, either to Oyster or to other companies that are in your network?
Well, to look at this as a problem of uncertainty, where companies are still thinking about it, and it's not to point a hasty finger or a blaming finger at organizations who have yet to, let's say, nail it all down, because these are new considerations and very complex ones. How do we let go of the office entirely? What are the implications of that? How do leaders feel about that? So it is absolutely understandable that there is slowness ultimately in many places, in many organizations, about sort of getting into the their next way of working. So we think of this uncertainty as sort of the center of the problem. Oyster helps because, of course, we can make it easy and convenient for employers to hire in any country. And so our customers have been able to offer geographic flexibility to their employees who may have relocated or who want to relocate, et cetera. So quelling uncertainty as regards how hard is this? Is it expensive? Can we manage it, et cetera? So that's our humble part in sort of attacking the uncertainty problem. And we're also keen to be supportive of HR teams as well as their employees with insights and information about how to tackle the many different challenges of a geographically distributed company. So I would encourage your listeners to check out the Oyster library at oysterhr.com. It's got lots of great, really incisive, deep topics that will resonate with people teams that are facing some of these challenges.
Excellent. Now, one of the things we talk about a lot are soft skills. I mean, everybody, essential skills, life skills. So first off, maybe I'll ask what your preferred term is for it, Jack.
Well, I think bravo for recognizing that we should be thoughtful about how we describe it, since soft skill by itself is not exactly an unpregnant term, because it already, like, what's a soft skill? Well, it's relating to a hard skill. What's a hard skill? So it's kind of old school that way, but I take it for the intention, which is sort of, we need to think about skills differently than we have historically, and soft skill has sort of been the candidate term for something that contrasts for the older way of measuring skills, which is sort of harder technical skills. So broadly, attributes. So which attribute, which soft skill do I wish people had more of? And so I would say for sure it's empathy. And I think this is an attribute, particularly of leadership, that had been gaining in importance for several years before the pandemic. But the experiences we've had in the last 19 months have made the skill, I think, more important than ever. Empathy.
So as an empath myself, I'm curious, since you've brought this up, do you feel that empathy was spiking at the beginning of the pandemic, but has now gone all but MIA?
No. Well, I think, it's again, smart way to pose the question, because it makes us reflect on primary consequences of the pandemic versus kind of more longer term consequences of the pandemic. And so when people are literally suffering, or have people that are going into hospitals, or have other exigencies in their lives, right? Challenging at home situations that are exacerbated by the need to work from home, for example, then I think empathy has very obvious work, right? And it's responsive, right? But what does empathy mean over a longer arc at an organization to be an empathic leader? And I think that is something that is unfolding now. And I think that it's not a dip, but sort of an intermediary period where we go from empathy as sort of reactionary, empathy, to more systemic empathy. What does that look like? What does it look like to install empathy in leaders purposefully at an organization, for example? That's exciting.
Oh, I like that. Because I think maybe last year was the bump everybody needed that brought some awareness and put empathy in the spotlight. And then I do think I'm seeing selfishness and a lot of stuff coming down, but as people are trying to come out of this and figure out, how do we support, and this is probably the new normal, what do we do differently? And I do think, because there was empathy shot up as a beacon last year in the height of things, that it hopefully continues to infiltrate and be a key part of every leadership model.
Let's hope.
Yes, let's hope. And so what would you want to tell educators, trainers, everybody else, to give the message to Gen Z, right? Because they're our hope for the future, the whole next generation. What should we be doing differently?
Great. So first thing I want to say about that is, I think it's time to stop talking about generations in the way that we have for such a long time. I read a New Yorker article. It's time to stop talking about generations. Very easy to Google and find. I think I 100% agree with it. And I think this is a bad idea, particularly as we're creating arbitrary slices of the time continuum, blindly heaping attributes on people and creating divisions where they don't necessarily need to exist. And so I would encourage every thinker in your audience to sort of think about this construct of generations and whether or not it is really useful to us. Let me give you an example. So of that sort of questionable utility. Before the pandemic, there was a narrative attached to millennials that suggested they were lazy and self-centered, and that was the reason they were unenthused by work, right? So when the pandemic gave all of us, boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, et cetera, the opportunity to detach and reflect upon work, many of us across all of these generations realized we wanted more. We have realized that we want meaning. And we have realized also that millennials were not particularly more lazy nor self-centered than any other generation that came before, just ahead of the curve in their need for meaning in work. And so I think what we owe is gratitude for sort of leading the charge there and discovering ahead of all of us something that I think it now becomes important in work. And so my message to companies and trainers and to everyone who sort of wants to attract and inspire talent in young people is to offer meaning.
I love both points you made about knocking down the generations. And I've also recognized, that there is a lot of value that the millennials have brought with their, really their interest in doing more and wanting more. Where I do like and see the difference in Gen Z is that Gen Z is more adamant about setting the boundary, much more definitive and decisive. I want that or I don't. And that's where I think they're leading the charge and showing the rest of us, right?
Right.
But yeah, no, I love that. Let's get rid of generations and this whole thing, like old, new, young. It's just like we're people. I hate labels.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Last question. The world needs more
love. That is very easy.
I love that. Any more comments, Jack, that you want to wrap up our weekly grind with?
Yes, very grateful to you, Loralyn, for this opportunity. It's been a great conversation. Would love to do it again. I want to give a shout out to folks on people teams. I think it's an incredible time to be in HR. There is a renaissance of HR afoot for sure. And we at Oyster are keen to support and inspire and be a part of your success. Come check out our library, come check out our services, connect with me on LinkedIn, Jack Mardack, also jack@oysterhr.com. Thank you again, Loralyn.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here, Jack, and talking to us about some of the things and, forcing some thoughts, right, around new concepts. Why should we be beholden to all these labels and things? Like, let's, challenge things. Thank you very
Indeed.
much.
Thank you.